All right, so that brings us to the speaker of the day. But Rob Vaughan-Johnson is our speaker of today. Rob, would you get... Here he is. Keen to get mobile. I'm not going to tell you a lot about Rob. You're going to learn about it as he talks. A wealth of experience, and you'll be blown away by what you hear, I'm sure.
Brian, that I do my own introduction was probably a mistake. You can't hear him?
Very well.
Okay. 14AC2 Johnson, RCV, acting unpaid corporal, acting cook, untrained wireless operator, air gunner. This was the zenith of my career. I'm national service in the Royal Air Force. And the dreadful winter of 1964, I was stationed in either Hemswell or Milton Hall. I don't remember now which it was, but sensibly working in the sergeant's mess, cookhouse, nice and warm, well-fed, and not very much work to do. I was then sent to Egypt, 205 Group Headquarters at Fade, and after my service in the Air Force, I spent 11 years in Her Majesty's Overseas Civil Service in the Colonial Police Service in Northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, and I achieved the rank of Chief Inspector, surprisingly. And thereafter, I got bitten by the helicopter bug and decided to go and fly. I did my flying training at Luton, which I believe is now one of London's 3rd airports. And I trained on both fixed wing and on helicopters. And so throughout my career, I ended up having, I might say I had to pay for my own training, which was a bit of a problem. But in due course, I held airline transport pilot licenses in 6 countries: UK, East Africa, Bermuda, Iran, Australia and Canada, and I'd qualified on 6 fixed wing and 12 helicopter types. An inexperienced pilot, of course, can't get work. It's the chicken and egg situation. Nobody wants a pilot without hours. You can't get the hours without the job. I managed to get a job with Management Aviation in Bourne, Cambridge. We were situated pretty well underneath the Whitton circuit. And there I learned crop spraying. Crop spraying in the UK didn't, perhaps crop treatments generally. This was spreading with a Hilo 12E, 2 hoppers, bring in an empty one, dump it down, move across, pick up the full one, and head off with that. The spraying aspect, Hilo 12C, small helicopter, and its equivalent, the Bell 47, very similar, flown from different positions. The Hilo flown from the centre seat, the Bell flown from the left-hand seat. And the Hilo 12E, which was really one of the best performing crop spraying helicopters. Normally one flew under all the wires available. It's impossible to fly over the top of them, and so we would find ourselves going underneath telephone wires or any other larger electrical obstructions. And I got quite used to it, although for years later, walking into a hangar, I used to duck my head. The boss had a particular area. There was a magical number in UK. If you could break the 1,000 acres sprayed in a day, the boss had 2 sons, and the 3 of them used to go up to Lincolnshire somewhere and try to break this magical figure. It just so happened that I was working in Essex, and the Fison's rep that we were flying for said, look, we've got a hell of a job we need to get you onto. There's a big crop of barley, black fly. We've got to do the best we can to let the farmer survive, get something out of his crop. And so off we went. I started just about lunchtime, having the rest of my other flying to do that day. And by the end of the day, we totted things up and discovered that the magical figure, 1,236 acres, had been flown, single pilot, and I believe the record stands today.
Wow.
I got then sent by the company, and before I get onto that, it wasn't all hard work. All sorts of funny jobs would crop up for a helicopter company. This is a bit difficult to see, but one of the major newspapers wanted to resolve the problem of dropping an egg. The theory was that if it's dropped from a sufficient height, it becomes aerodynamic, turns itself on end, and then doesn't break when it reaches the ground. It turns out to be totally false. And we happily proved it both on grass and on hard runway. Got through a dozen lion eggs. Yes. And really one could have told them that in the first place. From there I went to, I got a job in Uganda. Now I'll come back to that because that's the main purpose of the talk today. We'll just pop through the rest of the things fairly quickly. I was given a job in Pakistan, take over the operation from one of the directors of the company, Bill Dossett. The problem of the operations in Pakistan were the mobs that gathered around the helicopter wherever you landed. The main job was a gas pipeline construction. So before taking off, you had to clear the crowd back on both sides, make a nice big wide funnel shape, hurry back into the cockpit, and as they crept forward to see what was happening, you'd get the thing started up and lift off into inevitably a total cloud of dust. It couldn't see a thing. As you transitioned forward, so you cleared the dust, and then you would discover whether there were camels or horses or people on bicycles or whatever in front of you. Now, predecessor Bill had been doing this, and he entirely forgot, and how I don't know, that there was a mud hut in front of him. He came out of transition through the front door, and the whole lot disintegrated into dust and sticks and bits and pieces. And fortunately nothing caught fire. But Bill's accident report ended up saying, at this point, all attempt to remain airborne was abandoned. Next port of call was Iran. That involved mountain flying in the huge Zagros Mountains in the south of the country. Our base camp was at 7,000 feet. Our top landing site was at about 12,000. And it got pretty cold in the winter. A hell of a lot of snow which didn't melt. It just built up on itself. And in the summer it was fine. You only had to make sure that the weather wasn't clamming up behind you. But in the winter, the same landing site. The mess on the snow is my smoke canister to give a direction of the wind, because it gets a bit tricky at those sort of altitudes. And the helicopter pad was built out from the slope of the hill, as I say, at 7,000 feet, and the local villagers evidently owned the right to farm that little patch below the helicopter. And one day taking off, unexpectedly, a helicopter disturbed the ploughman at work. This picture, I'm sorry, is very poorly focused, but the ploughman, the plough, and both oxen are airborne. But so that brought me back to Australia, having had a brief visit down to the Gulf. I flew in the Gulf for about a year, and then across on the other side, flying out of Abu Dhabi, before coming back to Australia. And there I joined Joe Ward, who's probably familiar to most of you, on his, he was running an operation in the Pilbara railway line from Dampier to Tom Price and Parabadoo, and was one of the unfortunate pilots who were helping him to develop a system of flying the railway line by night low enough for the engineer inspectors to be able to see a crack in the rail. This meant some extremely hairy flying. We all scared ourselves stupid. We achieved the impossible, and as you know, miracles take a little longer. And having achieved it, Joe very rightly and very sensibly said, "It is too dangerous for the passengers, never mind the pilots." And the operation, in that aspect of the operation, was closed down. Hooray. The Pilbara presented various other aspects. I later on flew for Okanagan with the Sikorsky 61s, but in the top of this picture is a Ansett S61N, which I was lucky enough to go over to Mackay on the east coast and bring it back to join the operations in the north of West Australia. And our continuation training exercises, both with the Bristow helicopters and the Ansett ones, for water training, continuation trainings onto water. The only fresh water we could get was at Millstream, and it was very pleasant for the crew, after we put them through various forms of routine training, to hop out and have a bit of a swim around. Whilst still working in West Australia, incidentally, it's a very serious business flying a Sikorsky S61N, and one needs to be properly equipped, of course, with a helmet with an adequate rotor on its top, built-in goggles, and it's guaranteed to preserve your life if you have to abandon the helicopter at anything below 3 feet above ground level. India came next on the program. Offshore Bombay is a huge oil field, and one of the shifts that one worked out of Bombay involved about a 10-hour flying day, and in that period of time one did about 100 landings. That was quite an extraordinary thing, and it was an absolute routine. The other pilots, we had a number of Canadian pilots with us, maintained that they exceeded the 100 mark. I very carefully logged my daily flying, and I found that the most I did was 98 landings in the day, and I then noticed that, of course, I hadn't logged the first landing on the residential platform when I first arrived, and I hadn't logged my landing back in Bombay, so maybe the 100 mark was achievable. The sort of places that one would land on, wellheads, this little sort of construction of 3 units. If you had to go to all 3, you had to do a circuit for each one, which was a bit tiresome. For obvious safety reasons, you couldn't take off with passengers and move sideways. In the event of an engine failure, they'd have to swim. And so you had to do a proper circuit and keep things safe. And things used to get a little bit fraught sometimes there. One might occasionally get a little worked up. Now I need to get back to activities in Australia again. I came back from overseas to fly in Australia, and now onto the Sikorsky S76. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the 76. I don't know how that came about. But we were servicing a drilling rig, jack-up drilling rig, which was being towed down to Coburn Sound for overhaul when it ran into bad weather. And we had to evacuate the entire population, 52 men. This incredible picture that Brian produced, I don't know where he got it from, and it must have been quite late in the proceedings, because the rig was foundering and the helipad was uncomfortably close to the water. It was rolling phenomenally. The normal limit for helicopter landings was 5 degrees. Here we were knocking off about 30. We found there was a little period, about 10 seconds, when you could land on and load passengers. Because they were all wearing marine life jackets, big bulky things, we could only load 10. We couldn't get a full 15 on board at any one time. However, we managed to get them all off. It was a bit hairy. Needless to say, these things always happen when there's a monstrous gale blowing. Fortunately, this one didn't happen at night, which would have otherwise been fairly normal. But it was a little bit exciting. Now we come into the real object of the talk. I'm sorry to have bored you with all the other stuff in terms of an introduction first, but now we've finally got there. Flying in Uganda was a wonderful experience. So first of all, I'm going to bore you a bit more with a very rapid, very abbreviated history. I don't know if I can do this with one hand, but we'll try. Just a little abbreviated map, which Brian very kindly found for me, gives a little bit of an idea of how small the country is. The British brought Uganda from being a collection of kingdoms to a highly successful country with a central organisation of government, and it achieved independence in 1962. The first independent president was King Freddy of the Uganda, and he was displaced in a very bloody coup by Milton Obote, who promptly exiled King Freddy and installed himself as president. And there followed a 10-year period of increasingly oppressive rule, for want of a better word. But at the time of the Chip-Choppen Conference in 1971, Obote decided to kill off the remains of his political opposition. That included the commander of the armed forces, General Idi Amin, and the executive order to start the killings happened to be received by a subaltern who was on duty at that stage and happened to be on the list. He wasn't too happy about it, and promptly got hold of Idi Amin, who was on the Nile at a beautiful fishing lodge at the weekend. So Amin returned immediately to Kampala and stopped the killings that were going on in the barracks around the country. So we never know quite how many got killed in the barracks, but probably not, by far, not the full complement. But certainly a few did get killed before he got it stopped. The Inspector General of Police stepped in as president, and that worked very well for about a week and a half. And the army said, no, we're not going to be told what to do by a policeman. We want our own boss to run things. And Amin, very reluctantly, said, no, I'm a soldier, not a politician. But after a bit of persuasion, said, oh, I'll do what I can for 12 months. But it was quite obvious that he couldn't correct the country's woes in that period of time, and he extended the period to be a couple of years. It turned out differently. No. Amin was almost illiterate. He wrote with difficulty. He read almost syllable by syllable, so that his speeches in English initially were quite painful to listen to. But of course, with a bit of practice, he got quite good. And one should never confuse, of course, intelligence with education. He was a most highly intelligent man, and he had an incredible memory recall. And he could quote quite happily verbatim conversations from many years previously with the persons concerned, who might either be embarrassed, particularly if they were ministers trying to pull the wool over his eyes, or with huge pleasure if they were ex-soldiers and recalled their service together. Amin's first act was to ban all political activity, which was wonderful. I wish more countries could do the same. Politicians were totally restricted from active politicking, and he insisted that all the ministers that had been elected in the previous government return to their offices and get on with their job, which was really quite a clever move. We expected him to kill off, in traditional fashion, all his opposition. He didn't do that. He actually recruited from non-Obote areas and just about double the size of the army. However, having brought all political activity to a close, he enrolled all the ministers in the army as private soldiers. And it was an absolute quartermaster's delight the first time they turned up. Fred Kano's army was thoroughly put to shame, and they were themselves somewhat embarrassed. He then created the Defence Council. This was about a dozen of the Sandhurst trained officers in the army, and so that, together with the elected government and himself with the power of veto, gave him the means of running the country. He now started touring the country extensively, which brought the Uganda Police Air Wing very much into the fore, and telling even the remote areas, who'd never even seen a politician in their entire lives, what had happened, why he was where he was, what he was hoping to do. In the meantime, Obote had taken refuge in Tanzania next door with his old university friend, I think London School of Economics, Nyerere, and there he started sniping from the background at what was going on in Uganda. One of the first things, other non-political things, one might say, that Amin did was to arrange for the return of the body of King Freddie, who had died in the Docklands. He's a bit of a playboy, was Freddie when he was in exile. He died in London and was entombed there. And Amin thought it was the worst thing that could happen to a man, to die outside his own country. And so he arranged to have him brought back and tour around the country for final farewells before being ceremoniously buried in the Buganda King's royal tombs. The Defence Council, as I say, was created by the Sandhurst trained officers, or consisted of the Sandhurst trained officers. The Russian trained officers took a bit of offence after a year or so, and Amin said, okay, fair enough, next time there's a vacancy, I'll appoint one of the Russian trained officers to the Defence Council. And surprisingly, a very pleasant brigadier got blatantly framed for fiddling the petty cash and got chucked out, and the first Russian trained officer took his place. Surprisingly, there was a car accident and another one died and was also replaced by the Russian trained element. And this, I think, might well have been the beginning of the thin end of the wedge for Amin. Now, the country is the Central African Plateau of Africa, and it's about 4,500 feet above sea level. It gets 2 rainy seasons a year because the sun goes over the equator, bringing our summer down here, with one rainy season in Uganda, and goes back to take the summer to the northern hemisphere, second rainy season. It's bordered on the east side by Mount Elgon, bordering between Uganda and Kenya, and that has a height of about 4,200 feet. And on the west side of the Congo, the Ruwenzori Mountains, mountains of the moon, of about 18,000, correction, 16,800 feet. Sorry, I forgot to tell you about the Fliers Air Wing, the complete air wing. 6 fixed-wing, 12 helicopters. A very, very good little unit. And I think that's about the end of the lesson of Uganda 101. And hopefully we can get on to more entertaining things. The neighbouring country of, not quite neighbouring country of the Central African Republic was ruled by a chap who'd installed himself as an emperor. He had a special gold coach made for the occasion. He was a little ex-French colony, little man with a big ego. And a state visitor was arranged to come to Uganda But 2 or 3 days before, he'd gone into the prison in his capital and beaten some of the prisoners to death while he was drunk, which didn't impress Amin one little bit, but he couldn't cancel the state visit. But he did cancel the VIP helicopter and required that the second semi-VIP helicopter be replaced. So I went round there to State House, landed on the lawn, was doing a walk round as I always did, heard this clattering noise coming down the steps from the house. I thought, oh, it must be some lunch or something. I'll go and see to it stowed. And there, coming down the steps, was Amin. Coming down the steps was Bokassa himself. And what tinkling and clattering I'd heard was all these amazing decorations that he was carrying all over him. Little short man tinkling away, and not at all popular with Amin. We loaded him and his entourage with large ladies in fancy floral dresses, and a few of his ministers. They went off to Kampala, a little bit of a ceremonial there, very short, and started a tour around the country. The first stop, all the VIPs sat at the head table, the crowd spread out in front, and cups of tea were served all round. Amin called the waiter over, and a large glass of milk was put in front of Bokassa. The emperor obviously was not fond of milk, judging by his activities at home in the prison. But anyway, he slugged it down. Second stop, same thing happened again. All sat at the top table, up came a glass of milk. And for the third occasion of that first day, it happened yet again. The next day, we're touring on, and up came another glass of milk. By this stage, he was just about gagging at the idea of having to get this milk down him. However, on the way to one of the meeting places, we were supposed to link up with the Uganda Air Force DC-3. I got a message over the radio to say that it was unserviceable. So Amin always used to like to ride in the co-pilot seat alongside. He never wanted to fly, he never wanted to touch controls, but he certainly, on this instance, didn't want to fraternise with the passengers, particularly Bokassa. And so he said, okay, so what will we do? I said, well, perhaps I could arrange for the Twin Otter to meet us instead. And he thought that was a good idea. I called up the base, hoping very much that it wasn't engaged on some other operation. It wasn't. I said, can you get to where it was, Gulu or Sofa? And they said, we'll try. And about 4 minutes before I arrived there, they called up and said, we're on the ground, all is well. And they were standing very smartly in front of the Twin Otter. I landed close alongside, as close as one can with a large helicopter, without blowing things over. And doors open, out stepped Bokassa, 2 or 3 paces to one side, unzipped his fly and had a bloody good pee. And the assembled multitude at the little terminal building didn't seem in the least bit upset about it. I think Amin thought, well, my milk treatment was having the right effect, curing the alcoholic. We went on with the tour. They went off in the Twin Otter to rejoin with the helicopter later. The next day, still glasses of milk coming up. Only 2 meetings that day, and then back to Entebbe. He boarded his aircraft to go home. I've forgotten to give you a couple more pictures of the emperor in all his glory, alongside the semi-VIP helicopter. The difference between the VIP and the semi was that the VIP had thick carpets, 2 great big armchairs swivelling round, a drinks cabinet, and 2 big comfortable seats. The semi was a normal interior for 15 passengers, but it had a thin carpet and thin cushions on the seats. And so he never missed an opportunity for a careful little photographic session. Once he'd gone, Amin got back to his touring around the country, telling everybody what had happened and what he was hoping to happen, and what he was intending to do. And we went up north. I was flying in a game park called Cadepa Valley, up in the north of the country, and saw this hole in the dry riverbed. I went on and collected the game ranger for the area and his crew, and we came back and worked out that it was a mineral salt lick that had been dug out by elephants. It's quite extraordinary. Its presence was unknown up to that point, so it was really quite an interesting find. The Karamojong, a little bit further to the east of the game reserve area, are semi-nomadic, so they make these little bomas to live in for a short period of time. They're cattle people. They drink the blood and milk mixed together. They never eat the meat. The cattle are never consumed, and this gives them protection. These little surroundings of thorn enclosure against lions and leopards and cattle rustlers. We'll hear a little bit more about the rustlers later. The only day I knew Amin to take a day off. He wanted to go hunting. Oh, this is going to be fun. We took the VIP helicopter and his Batman and myself, obviously. And I thought, well, what we'll be doing, we'll find some game, land. He'll walk it up, he'll shoot something. I'll go and pick it up in the helicopter. If it's too big, I'll make a sling load, and we'll take it up to where we're staying overnight in the town. But no, we found the game all right, and had to separate one out and chase it. Chased it until it couldn't run any longer. It stood still, and he fired out of the window. Well, it was remarkable how the turbulence suddenly occurred in that area at that time, and the helicopter became very unstable, and he misfired several times, handed the rifle back to his Batman and said, "Get the armourer to have a look at the sights on this when we get to our destination tonight. Give me the other rifle." But fortunately by this time the animal had gained its breath and pushed off into the bush, and I think he was a bit fed up with the whole thing at that stage, so we went on to the night stop, and he rang me that evening. I was in the hotel, he was in the barracks, and said, "I have to get back to Kampala early tomorrow, and I must not be late." So I said, "That's okay, it's an hour and a half flying. If we take off 2 hours before, that'll be fine." Okay. So he rang me again early in the morning and said, "We mustn't be late on this." And I repeated what I had said, and he arrived on time, which wasn't always the case. And with 10 minutes to spare, we loaded up, everything was fine, took off. And on the way, he said, "The defense counsellor has ordered me back," and they said, "If I don't turn up, they're going to arrest me." And I looked a bit surprised, and he said, "Oh, yes, they tried that once before, but what could they do?" Well, I thought, well, what could they do then? And now you're all worried about it. What can they do now? It seemed a little bit disturbing to me that he was this worried at this stage. Anyway, we got him back, half an hour to spare. And the news program that night, the explanation became apparent. The Defence Council had invented a number of medals that they wanted to award to him. And of course, Lake Victoria borders the south side of Uganda, and so there would have to be a VC, a Victoria Cross, naturally. There was also some form of Distinguished Service Order, and one or two others. So that explained the threats from the Defence Council, and he never wore any of his campaign medals up till that point from his service in the KAR. As head of state, he thought it was wrong to wear another country's campaign medals. So now he's got medals of his own. The morning news on the radio explained even further. Having presented the general with all these medals, the Defence Council presented themselves with the same. So that was the only day off that I knew him to take. I got hijacked. The exiled king of Burundi, a young fellow, Natari 5, pitched up rather unexpectedly in Uganda, and Amin thought it would be nice if he could arrange for him to visit his home in Burundi. And he rang up Colonel Michimbero, who was the president of Burundi at that time, and got a guarantee of safety. Now, all I knew about it was that I was to turn up, I was to get some US currency, take my passport, and be prepared for a unspecified number of days out of the country. I didn't know where we were going or what it was about until I picked up the ex-king, and even then I didn't get the full story. So with a few ministers and a couple of army heavies, I flew him down at the border, stopped to refuel, and whilst I was refueling, the young king came and said, "Where are we going?" Which I thought was a little odd. However, I said, "Well, Bujumbura." "Oh God," he said, he turning a nasty shade of grey. "I can't go there, they'll kill me." And I said, "Well, oh, okay then. Let's go to State House," which was just alongside for the southern area. And you can ring up Amin and see what it's all about, get it sorted out. And whilst I was explaining this, huge gorilla with a machine gun came up to me and said, "You fly." And I said, "Yeah, the State House, fine, no problem." "No, you fly." "What, Bujumbura?" "You fly." So I thought, well, there's no point, I'm not going to get anywhere with an argument here. So we loaded up, off we went to Bujumbura, the capital of Burundi. And there was a happy committee greeted his arrival. And I thought, well, thank goodness for that. Amin has pulled off the safety for this chap. And I stayed overnight with a French pilot from the Burundi outfit. And he asked in the morning if I would fly there, Colonel Muchimbero himself, who was a helicopter pilot, in the 212. I said, "Has he any twin engine experience?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, that doesn't matter." So we had a little bit of a fly around, and that was fine. Loaded up the refuel, loaded up the ministers, and set off back to Entebbe. I decided I could do a straight run instead of having to stop off and refuel. If I went over Rwanda and Tanzania, a bit of the lake, and I'd have plenty of fuel. And so this is what I did. And in flight I told the ministers that we were now over Tanzanian airspace, in Tanzanian airspace over Tanzania. They had a fit of absolute hysterics. "We can't be in Tanzania, they'll shoot us down," and blah blah. And I thought, well, sir, you're right. You had me hijacked. You can suffer the consequences. So they said, "Make sure and tell us when we're back in Uganda." So I forgot for a little while. And when I did tell them, I thought Christmas must have arrived. We were going to cheers and yells and carry on from the back, all delighted to be safely home again. Hence the story about getting hijacked. There was a little border incident on the south side called Kasese. A couple of army soldiers had drifted over into Tanzania to get some water. They'd made friends with a couple of girls, upset the locals, and got chucked into the local chuki. And there they were, locked up in the prison. Amin wanted to fly down and sort things out. I landed 200 or 300 yards back from the border, behind a copse in a little dell where I was in cover from fire and cover from view, and sat and ate my sandwiches while he went off to sort things out. And then I thought, well, it'd be a good idea. I'll go and join the soldiers in the copse and get the lowdown. They'll know exactly what's going on. So over I went. They're very hospitable, pleased to see me. Don't know why. And offered me some lunch. I thought, well, this will help relationships. Yes, I'll have some lunch with them. walked on, it was a 44-gallon drum sitting on a little bit of fire, and it was going blurp, blurp. And the chap picked up a long-handled dipper from the sand, sloshed it around, pulled it out. He's got a goat's foot skin and horn and the whole jolly lot fruit on the end. He dropped it back in, scooped around a bit more. Out came some entrails, a long length of sausage-like stuff, and he dropped that back in, had another scoop around, came up with some meat, and put it in a pannikin, and said, "Would you like some rice with that?" And I said, "My God, that would have to be better than this lot. At least I might be able to eat the rice." So he picked up a spoon out of the sand and dug into a pan and slopped some rice on the top of it. It actually was delicious. I don't know what herbs they put in there, but it was absolutely fantastic. I must remember to do, what's that cooking program? Anyway, be a bit of variant. Amin came back and was quite pleased to see me fraternising with his soldiers. It turned out the story was exactly so, and he'd gone over across the border into this little tiny village, to the little lockup, ordered the release of his men, brought them back with him, and that was the end of the story. But at this particular moment, the MiG, I say the MiG, because I think it was the only serviceable MiG left in the Uganda Air Force, appeared overhead and started a little aerobatic display down the road, pulled up the end, over the top, rolled out, dived back. Figure of 8 program, lost his way, went off into Tanzania, did a 360 to see where he'd got to, came back across the road and bucketed off back to Entebbe. Amin was very pleased at this display of the might of his Air Force. And so going up to the other end of the country on one occasion, this is actually the map that was produced exclusively for the Uganda Police Air Wing. And it was extremely useful, having in effect, a compass rose based on Entebbe. Anywhere around the country, going between any two places, it gave you a very good idea of what your heading should be. On the way up to the Karamoja area, I was flying again in a 212 and saw a dead buck. As I flew past, it didn't dawn on me. Then I thought, that didn't look right. There's something funny going on there. I circled around, let down, and had a look, and there was a leopard feeding on the rump. So I pulled away and thought, this will make a picture. And my camera was between the seats in my flight bag. So as I was out of the road, I got it out, got the cover off it, got it sorted out, and found that I couldn't reach round to take a picture with my left hand. I'd have to do it with my right hand. So I let the window down, put the window down, hung the camera around my neck, organised the up-down lever, the collective lever, and edged across, looking through the viewfinder, flying with my left hand, took a picture, pulled away and thought, no, that'll never come out as a picture. I'm too far away there, it won't show anything. So I thought, well, I'll go back and have another go. And so I hovered in at about 6 foot above the ground, and thought, well, I'll get as close as I can. If it runs away, I'll just take a picture anyway, but in the meantime, I'll see how close I can get. And looking through the viewfinder, I suddenly noticed it was no longer there. It had taken one bound to the front of the animal and was currently airborne on its way straight into the window of the helicopter. I dropped the camera as though it was red hot, changed hands on the controls in a very big hurry, grabbed an absolute handful of collective, and as I went up, this leopard went through underneath the helicopter, and I thought, my God, I'd be writing reports for the rest of my career about how I collided with a low-flying leopard. Now, one of the big troubles that they had up there in that part of the country was cattle rustlers, as I mentioned. earlier on, and this was getting serious now. Normally they'd raid 20, 50, 100 cattle, something like that. They'd come across from Kenya, and in this particular instance there'd been a very big raid overnight, and I was sent up with a Jet Ranger, Bell 206, to help out. I don't know what I was expected to do, however, locate things, generally speaking. I landed up there. There was a conference between the senior army officers and police officers. First thing was, would you take this load of ammunition to this small police station? They were attacked during the night. This looks like a very big raid. Their vehicle was burnt out. They've run out of ammunition, and we need to get this lot to them as soon as possible. It was a very big raid. In fact, it involves thousands of heads of cattle and a huge number of raiders. What obviously they'd done, they'd infiltrated the country towards the new moon, and then on the night of the new moon they'd raided all these little bomas around the place, collected all the available cattle, run them into this riverbed, and were heading for the border. It just so happened that I thought, well, I'll have a look at the riverbed as we go by and get an idea of the size of this and what's involved. And as I flew down just a fair bit above tree height level, 100 feet, 100 yards out, something like that, I could see them going up the riverbed, and there were lots of cattle, and unfortunately lots of armed raiders. Normally they only carried spears. Now I was seeing rifles and shotguns, which was a bit disturbing. And I suddenly realized what I thought was a curve in the river in front of me was in fact an outcrop of trees, and it was absolutely ram-jam with cattle and cattle raiders, and I'd left it too late to turn off to the left. I had no option but to go right across the river, and I thought, let's hope that there are no armed raiders where I want to go across. I was wrong. The mob in front opened fire with everything imaginable, including tracer. They had, it subsequently turned out a lot of them were Kenya Army on leave, and they brought their weapons with them. As I went across the river, I realized there were two groups of raiders, and I was going between them. They all opened fire. The poor old African policeman alongside me, the inspector of police, was screaming, go up, and I was thinking, no bloody fear, I'm going down into the treetops here, which I did, and I went through like a woodcock, zapping through the tops of the trees, hoping that it would confuse, and hoping, incidentally, hoping like mad that they were shooting at me, because if they did that, they were going to miss. And I came out the other side like a rabbit, cleared the area, climbed up height, and went off to the police station and delivered the ammunition for them. And that was really quite an unpleasant moment, one way and another. It didn't get any better, because when I got back to the town, they said, would you mind taking this machine gun crew just to the top of this riverbed, and they'll trap the raiders when they get there and cut them off at the pass, almost literally, because at the head of the stream there was an escarpment. So the machine gun crew was extremely macho in the barracks. We loaded up their guns and their ammunition, and off I went, delivered them. And I could see the expression on their faces change as I took off. So they were alone in the bush. It was very lonely and a very dangerous place to be, with all these poaching people coming with their guns, and they were expected to stop them. Anyway, back to the town again. The army's idea was that they would encircle the raiders and enforce a pincer movement from both sides, cut them off at the pass, as I say, and all would be well. But if they went slow enough, most of them would be out of the raid by the time they got them caught, and so it wouldn't be too dangerous. And this is in fact what happened. I was asked to take a captain out to make a sit rep. I landed, in a nice little bit of a clearance, and shut down the engine, and to my horror discovered that there was gunfire all round. They were still busy at it on all sides, and I don't know who was shooting at who, but I hastened off to get the captain and say, I'm going home, you can stay if you like. He didn't. He preferred to come with me. It got a rapid start up and got the hell out of there. That night I slept well before going home the next day. So there is a little bit of a quick summary of what one might call a flying career, I suppose. And thank you, Brian, very much for helping out with the slides and getting that thing sorted. And thank you for your attention.